Hello, this is Erik Devereux. Thank you for watching my video on the topic of the persistence of an underclass and a society's eventual decline. Here, let me just start the slideshow for the presentation and we'll begin. So again, the topic is the persistence of an underclass and a society's eventual decline. This is one of a series of video presentations I'll be doing over the next couple of months that specifically focus on aspects of poverty and social policy, especially as they do pertain to a country like the United States or other advanced industrial or post-industrial societies. So one of the key questions in social policy that so many researchers and social theorists are interested in, and also so many nonprofit organizations and various leaders and advocates, is why does poverty persist? We have been trying for a very long time to think through and implement ways to reduce poverty, again, especially in a country like the United States, a really wealthy country, and as well around the world in some of the poorest nations. Poverty remains a very persistent problem, and there's been social theorists who have warned us, and social observers who have warned us for a long time that this is a difficult problem and one that is going to stay with us unless we find ways to make serious progress. Here's my favorite. Jesus, per the Gospel of John, you will always have the poor with you. One of the great prophets concerned about the plight of the poor and dedicated to the well-being of the poor, still warning us from the year 30, 2,000 years ago, that the poor were going to persist and were always going to be something that we would have to be thinking about and worrying about even in our day and age 2,000 years later. So I come at this from two different perspectives. First is the perspective of social science research. I'm trained as a social scientist and spent my entire life embedded in the social science research community, and that includes people who work in the microeconomics of education, employment, earnings, and poverty. And there we have a very consistent narrative that we get poverty when people, for whatever reason, are not able to get suitable education that matches the job skills that are needed today to allow them to earn a significant high wage. And without the subsequent employment and earnings, then poverty becomes an ever-present feature of their lives. And we also have research that talks about how poverty becomes ingrained in particular communities, transmitted down through families, becomes almost hereditary, unfortunately, and becomes a very, very difficult problem to address if it becomes that ingrained. On the other side, I have a background in American political science, and there has been a fascinating interaction within the context of political party politics in the United States with social policy and poverty issues, really from 1932 and the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the creation of the New Deal, all the way through the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson, the reaction to those programs under Ronald Reagan, the subsequent reformulation of welfare under Bill Clinton, and various efforts since then, including to a great degree efforts such as No Child Left Behind, the major education policy initiative of the last decade, all intertwined in party politics, competition between Democrats and Republicans for the Congress and for the presidency, and a really important issue. And it's played out in different ways, both in terms of actual substantive attempts to address poverty and also, of course, in symbolic efforts to mobilize voters one way or the other. And then there's been a lot of evaluation research, including extremely sophisticated evaluation research conducted in the last 30 years that has, among other things, championed the use of randomized controlled trials, RCTs, for the purpose of determining whether or not specific interventions to try to increase the well-being of the poor and help poor people to better their condition actually are going to work. And there's just been incredible intellectual foment around that, and that's actually going to be a topic of one of my future presentations. But I also come at the issue of poverty from another really unique perspective, and that is childhood spent in poverty. My parents lived something of a bohemian lifestyle from my birth to the time I was 9, but my parents divorced when I was 9 years old, and when I was 12 years old, I went to live with my mother in a rural location that she had moved to after the divorce. It didn't offer her a lot of economic opportunity. At the time, it was also the time of the Carter administration, the time of extreme economic instability in the United States. And I went into a period of time, particularly from age 12 to age 16, where I was one of the poorest people in the United States. There was some shock recently, stories in the media about discovering that there were Americans who were living in under $2 a day, which is almost a global standard for poverty, not just an American. It might be an American standard. The shock was, could people in the United States really be that poor? And the answer is, I was one of these people who, adjusting for inflation, was certainly living at times in under $2 a day. And especially from the time I was 12 to 16, I endured homelessness and housing insecurity, a lot of moving around, at times not really knowing where I was going to be living, and moving frequently. I lived in several structures that lacked interior plumbing and running water, and were heated by wood that we had to split ourselves even in the deepest cold of winter, and otherwise were far below the standard of living most people associate even with poor people in the United States. I experienced food insecurity and nutrition deficits. There's a lot of medical reasons to believe I should have grown up to be between about 5'10 and 5'11. I'm much shorter than that. But I have some structural features I share with my son, such as the size of my feet. He is 5'11, and I think that some of that is just due to food insecurity and nutrition deficits I experienced in adolescence at the time when I should have been growing. We had a lot of unstable household income because my mother lacked marketable skills in the environment where we were living. She worked a lot in the cash economy, working by the hour, paid under the table, or paid minimum wage. I did some of that as well. And so we had a lot of unstable household income. I received little preventative pediatric medical or dental care from age 12 to 18, and I'm still experiencing the consequences, especially in terms of dental care from that many decades later. Just one sign of all of this instability was when I moved to my college dormitory when I was 18 years old and went to college. That dormitory was my 24th residence, which is an incredible amount of housing mobility and insecurity, even by military standards or diplomatic family standards. That's a lot of mobility for someone to have experienced in 18 years of life. So I have both a social scientific training and appreciation of all the research that's related to poverty, but also a pretty unique perspective, having experienced some of the most severe poverty you can experience in the United States. So, moving on. Why does poverty persist? And in particular, why does it persist in the form of an underclass? And by an underclass, we we recognize the United States, and this is, I think, pretty well accepted. We have strata of people in the United States who seem trapped into minimum wage employment or other low income opportunities, and perform a variety of tasks that we would associate with an underclass. But one of the most important points in the level of social theory is that we find evidence of a underclass in every civilization that we look at that was based on a hierarchical political and social system, and that's pretty much almost every civilization on the record. The only civilizations that don't evidence that much hierarchy are hunter-gatherer civilizations, such as a few that we still find in the Amazon rainforest or in extreme remote parts of Indonesia and that part of the world. And of course, the evidence we have of some of the hunter-gatherer societies that were the original Americans or Native Americans before the time of the arrival of the Europeans did not evidence much hierarchy. And there we don't see an underclass. But otherwise, if you have a hierarchical political and social system, we see the underclass. So why does the underclass persist across history in all these different civilizations? That's, I think, really an important question you have to tackle. And it's frankly a question that a lot of people who look at poverty in the United States today do not address. They're working at a level within that sort of assumes the underclass is there, and then what are you going to do about it? But I think until we look at the persistence of the underclass and why civilizations develop an underclass, we are going to have some problems coming up with systematic approaches to trying to solve the poverty problem and really put it behind us. And by the way, I am an optimist. I think we can do this. I think it's just a matter of political will, but also it's a matter of policy design that is based on a realistic assessment of what's happening in our economy and in our society. So, poverty in the form of an underclass is not something that we need to associate with capitalism, because we find the underclass present in non-capitalist societies. The Soviet Union had its underclasses, for example, and it was a non-capitalist society. And we can see other non-capitalist societies, both in history and even today, that show signs of an underclass. And we find the underclass in a variety of political systems. We find it in democracies and dictatorships. If you think about the intersection of economics and politics, we see the underclass present across the entire spectrum of civilizations. It's not about either the economic system or the political system. It's about something really fundamental in the hierarchical structures of all of these societies. So, societies create an underclass because someone has to do the dirty jobs, like pick up the garbage or clean bathrooms or slaughter animals. Every society, including our own, looking from 2,000 years, 5,000 years to the present, has had these types of jobs that have been deemed in many ways socially undesirable. They are dirty, smelly, nasty. They are not the kind of jobs that a lot of people aspire to, and they end up being the jobs that get assigned to an underclass. And I think it is the desire to do that, to set aside a group of people and say, this is what we want you to do in our society, and so that other people will not have to do that, that is a major force behind the development of the underclass. I know that may sound very simplistic, but I think on one dimension it's also incredibly profound. And I'm going to get back to looking at that from another lens, and you'll see why I think it's worth going down this road and thinking this way, even if it might strike you as a little simplistic. So, beyond humanitarian considerations, are there other reasons we should be concerned about poverty in the form of a persistent underclass? And I strongly support humanitarian considerations when it comes to dealing with the poor, having, among other things, been extremely poor myself and knowing what it's like to be on the side of that. But I just want to point out that in the context of the United States, we're a very, very wealthy society. On a relative basis, most of our poor are not that poor by global standards. Again, there are some, like myself when I was a child, who sort of are outliers in that regard. If humanitarian considerations are our prime driver, then I strongly submit, that our focus should be outside the United States. It should be on places around the world where we see truly extreme poverty persisting for a lot of people and really causing severe humanitarian problems. But I want to argue to you that, in fact, even in the United States, we have to be extremely concerned about the persistence of our underclass, the presence of our underclass, how we treat the underclass, because I'm going to argue here that it has a lot to do with our long-term prospects as a civilization. So to do that, I want to bring up something you may be familiar with, the standard normal distribution or standard normal curve. As you might recall from statistics, under this distribution, each of these equally spaced areas are a standard deviation. As you move out to the extremes, you end up with fewer and fewer people, and you consider the population to be centered around an average and then to deviate on both sides from that average. I want to say that this particular shape of this distribution is not that relevant to the argument I'm about to make. I could give you other distributions with alternate shapes that would still, I think, lead to the same concerns and results. But let's start with the normal distribution. And I want you to imagine that this is the distribution that we could measure of the inherent capacity or capabilities, the cognitive potential of infants immediately at birth, literally 1 minute after birth. And what I want to argue, and I think this is very sound from a variety of research you can look at, that we have no way of predicting where an infant is going to fall on this distribution, that an individual infant on this distribution, based on any easily discernible external characteristics, such as the tone of their skin, the color of their hair, the color or shape of their eyes, the accents with which their parents speak a language, the national origins of their parents, their genitalia. Anything that we can measure about the child will not enable us to predict where they fall on this distribution of inherent capacity, cognitive potential. Controlling for one thing, and that is prenatal care. If there is an association between those externally measurable characteristics of their parents and prenatal care, then of course there's going to be a prediction that we can make, because if there's groups that tend to have poor prenatal care because of such factors as the color of their skin, then there will be an association. But at least I believe in the United States and other societies like ours that we will. Let's just imagine that we can put that on the shelf, recognizing it as a factor, that we will ignore prenatal care for the moment and say that we just don't know where an individual child will fall on this distribution of cognitive potential based on any externally discernible characteristics of themselves. Again, skin tone, hair color, any of those types of factors. So we just don't know. And what this means is that there's nothing about their parents that should be predictive of this either. So, for example, parents who self-identify as white, I'm going to talk about race in a little bit, not about what I'm talking about when I talk about race, but parents who self-identify as white, which often means of Western or Eastern European extraction of a couple hundred years ago coming to the United States, there's no reason why two white parents, even of any achievement in life, are necessarily going to give birth to children who are out here in the extreme positive side of this distribution relative to the average, relative to anywhere else. Now, we do know this, that after a child is born, we get epigenetic effects. They're raised inside a household, and the conditions inside that household in terms of stimulating their cognitive development will cause them to develop on a particular trajectory and express some of their cognitive capacities in a particular way. And by 3-4 years old, we can really see those epigenetic effects causing profound differences between different children. And that can be strongly associated with various externally measurable factors. If there's an association between those factors and wealth, income, access to education, access to quality childcare, access to nutrition, all of this comes into play. And we will see epigenetic effects causing a variety of differences to show up systematically between groups that can be associated with externally visible or measurable factors. But at birth, that is not the case. Here I think is the key conclusion I want you to take from this. The unpredictability, the randomness of this inherent human potential means that if we were a truly egalitarian society in the United States, there should be no easily discernible relationship between occupation and externally visible characteristics such as genitalia, skin tone, hair type, eye shape, accent, any of that. The distribution of occupations and the distribution of income and related factors should be non-correlated with any of that. So, for example, if we were truly egalitarian, then about 25% of all trash truck workers would be females of European or what we call white ancestry. Here's one of them right now. This lovely young woman in New York City was one of the few white females to graduate from the class that produced sanitation workers in 2011, according to the New York Daily News. Now, you and I probably have never in our neighborhood ever seen a person like this picking up our trash. I certainly have not. Where I live, I would say 99% of all of the trash truck workers are Latino males, generally recent immigrants to our area, and some African American males, but I have never seen a woman of any particular background picking up the trash. We don't really think it highly likely that over time we're immediately going to get to a position where we would say, 25% of our trash truck workers would be females, or 25% of our corporate leaders females, 25% of anything female, or non-white. We feel this is unlikely because our society actually has pretty rigid divides about this. But what is that really all about? Well, what is happening is that advantaged groups in any society uses their position within the political and social system in a hierarchical setting to shield their children from the consequences of having average or below average inherent potential. And they go through a variety of ways of doing this, from the most harsh and oppressive to very, very subtle things that people do now, involving special medical tests or other types of things to say, even though our child does not appear to have a high inherent potential in one way or the other, they should still receive the benefits and opportunities associated with it. And that's because certainly, parents in advantaged groups certainly don't want their children to be shuttled into the jobs of the underclass. And so over time, the society creates an underclass. It slots persons into those dirty jobs based on externally visible characteristics, not based on inherent potential. And at the same time, the society also engages in a form of social promotion, where it takes members of advantaged groups and it gives them occupations that are beyond their objective potential. And no one has been more subject to social promotion in the United States than white males, even though we tend to associate social promotion with African Americans or other groups where we've had conversations, inner city schools, not reading at grade level, not being ready to graduate high school, all this kind of stuff. Reality is that white males have been subject to more social promotion than any other advantaged group you can possibly imagine. I'll be talking about that in another video later. And I can talk about that as well for being a white male myself and having seen the effects of that type of social promotion affect my life as much as anything else. So as a consequence, the society systematically underutilizes some of its most important human resources while promoting less capable persons into positions of authority and prestige just because they come from these advantaged groups and allowing them to be socially promoted in that regard. So back to our normal distribution. Here is what really, really matters in terms of the long-term stability and viability of a society. The people who are born with an inherent potential way out on this positive edge of the distribution, way out here, the 1% or the tenth of a percent, these individuals, whether they are in science, technology, literature, the arts, any particular endeavor, their positive impact on the well-being of society is incredible. Think about a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs, a Twyla Tharp, other very famous and well-known geniuses, essentially, who are out here at this edge. They have an amazing, powerful effect on society, very positive. And any society that wants to succeed over time has got to allow the individuals who are out here to express their potential. If it does not, if it starts saying, look, because your skin is the wrong color, or your eyes are the wrong shape, or you speak with an accent, or you're a woman, we are not going to let you express your potential, then we are tossing away the most important source of innovation and growth in our economy. And the society will feel the negative effects of that. I can give you a couple examples. When my father was working for Lyndon Johnson's Office of Economic Opportunity, he encountered a young man working in the turnip fields in New Mexico, a teenager, who was a mathematics genius, who had taught himself a whole series of accounting practices to keep track of turnip picking and profits and everything else going on in those fields, all self-taught. And my father and others took steps to get that young man into college. But for every young man, for you to tell that story, there's got to be a lot of other people who never get that opportunity and are told, look, even though you could be, for example, one of the greatest particle physicists in the history of this earth, you instead are going to be a trash truck driver. And that's your fate, because we're going to subject you to being a member of the underclass, and we're not going to give you those opportunities. And others and societies that do that, again, are throwing away an incredible amount of potential. What they can leverage out of these individuals for societal growth and well-being is so high. And I don't place myself out here, by the way. This isn't a story about me. I'm someplace in here, just like most other people. I'm someplace back in here. But I've met people out here. I met people at MIT, another example, a Vietnamese boat person who I went to school with, who barely spoke English when he came to the United States, and a couple years later was on the path to eventually become the person to get the most MIT degrees ever in the history of the institution. I believe 10 MIT degrees were conferred on this person, and a couple years earlier he was a Vietnamese boat person. And he's had incredible impact on a variety of fields related to computer science, electrical engineering, and other societies at times might have let that person not go to college, not encourage them to go to college, not allow them to succeed at that level. Okay, so by preventing persons from expressing that inherently high potential and pushing them into the underclass, and by promoting other persons above their potential, I think a society puts itself on an inevitable trajectory toward decline, because it is throwing away some of its most crucial human resources and then sort of letting the Peter principle run amok and promoting incompetence because of externally visible factors that are related to being in an advantaged group. And, if we are in competition with other societies, and I think we generally are, other societies that find ways to be less discriminatory and to leverage their human capital better than we can leverage ours, eventually are going to start to win in that competition. And I think that is one of the stories behind the eventual decline of most other civilizations of which we have on historical record. So a persistent in underclass is more than a humanitarian or moral issue. Allowing the stratification of society to limit the expression of human potential really is a ticket to disaster. Okay, solutions. Well, here's just a couple things I'll say for now, and then later on I'll add more in other presentations. Capitalism is not the problem. I have some left-leaning relatives and friends who would be very discomforted to hear me say this, but I actually think capitalism is one of the most corrosive forces against the presence of an underclass, and has done more to reduce the presence of an underclass compared to other systems, and offers a lot of hope that we can solve this problem, because at the end of the day, capitalism does want to leverage people for their potential, and does do that as much as it possibly can, subject to other restrictions. So I don't think that capitalism is the problem. And second, I think what we need is political resolve more than we need scientific research. I'll be talking about this again in future presentations, but I just really doubt the overall resolve of the United States and other societies around us now to truly solve the poverty problem by addressing it with the resources it needs and by thinking about it in a systematic way and addressing it in a systematic way, as opposed to a piecemeal, ad hoc, or very limited manner. All right, that's it for now. If you want to learn more about me, here's some contact information. Please contact me by going to the website. If you go to the website, I'm going to click here and we'll go to the website. I hope we go there. Here's the website. Devereux Consulting. You can go under About. And here I am, Erik Devereux, and you can view my complete profile on LinkedIn. And it'll come up in a second. And there I am. You can learn more about me. You can link in with me if you want. Also under About, back on the website, you can go to Contact, and here is my complete contact information. Please do email me. I'm not accepting any comments on these videos because I don't have time to curate them and to eliminate any negative or unfair or nasty comments that might come up in this internet age. So I would strongly prefer not to receive comments through comments on this video, but I'm always interested in talking to people of goodwill who are serious about these issues and would like to explore them further. Thank you so much for your time, and again, there will be more videos in this series up soon. Bye now.